Dr. Amit Kapoor. Dr. Amit Kapoor is the Honorary Chairman at Institute for Competitiveness in India. He is also the CEO of India Council on Competitiveness. He is the Chairperson for Social Progress Imperative and Shared Value Initiative in India. Furthermore, being an advisor to Thinkers 50 and participant with Global Solutions Network, he is also an affiliate faculty for Macroeconomics of Competitiveness. Dr. Kapoor has also been inducted in the Competitiveness Hall of Fame and has closely worked with NITI Aayog. He is a doctorate in Industrial Economics and Business Strategy. He is also the author of India City Competitiveness Report, India State Sustainability Report, and other reports published on a periodic basis. It's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Amit Kapoor at IMA Conclave 2019.
Good afternoon, all of you. It's a fairly tough act to follow after what Ranjan has actually said. In fact, I couldn't disagree with any of the points that he's actually said, but I would like to try to build on whatever he's actually said and try to take it forward. So if you really look at what is happening around us, this is a very interesting time that we are seeing. It's a context which is rapidly changing. There was a very interesting graph or a very interesting picture that was shown to you in the morning, and that was of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a reflection of what is happening to the world today, rightly or wrongly. The question is, why is it actually happening? Why is the rise of Donald Trump happening, and why is it disturbing the world? There's another thing that we have seen. It is not only the US. It is actually Brazil, which is seeing some very interesting sets of things. It is actually Brexit, which is breaking the neck of European Union. We have issues like Turkey, Erdogan is there, we have Syria. But why have all these things happened over a period of time? This has happened because of the context in which we are actually operating, and the context which is very, very startling. And the context is driven by the disparity that we actually see in the world. In fact, what Ranjan was saying, that India is actually, there is a large level of disparity in the country. Let me give you some very interesting points here. In fact, the top 10 families of India control wealth which is equivalent to the bottom 400 million people in this country, which is one of the most startling facts. If that is the kind of wealth disparity that actually exists, we are actually sitting on a very huge time bomb. Time bomb because it is actually going to create a social strife. It is going to create a situation which we will not know how to manage. Let's go a little deeper into it. If you really look at the growth story of India, the growth story of India is amazing. We are growing at about 8% over the period of last 20, 30 years. But the question here is that the growth is not happening equally across equal parts of the country, or all parts of the country. Quite interestingly, we had done some work, and you'll see that there are just about 6 or 7 states which define the way India is actually growing. There are states which have not grown over a period of time. Their contribution is fairly insignificant. Similarly, if you really look at the cities itself, there are cities which dominate the place. If you talk about Maharashtra, there's something very interesting in Maharashtra. The top 8 cities contribute close to about 90% of Maharashtra's GDP. Maharashtra contributes about 17% of India's GDP. 90% is coming from 8 cities. That means that quite a lot of economic effect is happening in Maharashtra. But there's also a very interesting fact about Maharashtra. The richest person in the country and the poorest person in the country live in the same state of the country itself. It's in Gadchiroli where the poorest person would actually be living. So that means we are actually hitting at a very interesting issue of disparity. The second thing when we actually talk about disparity has to be looked at from the perspective of the whole issue of divide that we actually see between women and men. It is becoming a very patriarchal thing that we see. There is a whole huge issue that we see from a cultural viewpoint. But the question here is going to be that how do we break that syndrome? The syndrome has to be broken fairly quickly because that is where we have to reinvent ourselves as a country, as a society. Let me go deeper into the societal aspect itself. In fact, when we talk about Industry 4.0, I think we need to talk about Society 4.0 right now in a country. And why do we have to talk about Society 4.0? Because if we don't change ourselves as people, as students, as professionals, we will not be able to change the country itself. Quite interestingly, if I talk about the people here, or the society at large, How do we act? If you really talk about students today, in fact, nobody has criticized the millennium generation until now in the morning session. Everybody has been going gung-ho about them. But let me criticize you for a moment. The young generation today has the shortest attention span that we have actually seen in the history of mankind or humankind. So if you really look at it, their attention span is less than 1 minute. They do not actually look at things in a very earnest or a very serious way at points in time. Today we are actually talking about a world which has seen the rise of peak IQ that happened in the 1990s. We are now seeing that there is a drop in IQ that is actually happening. In fact, there is a consolidated research which shows the drop in IQ is happening. And why does that actually happen? That happens because we are not really looking at things in a serious way. We are not reading. We are not committing ourselves to a certain set of things. A lot of people here on the top benches, they would actually be spending a lot of time on Twitters or the Facebooks of the world. But the question is, they do not realize that it is actually killing them rather than really pushing them forward. The next thing that we have to look at here is, in terms of, like, when you talk about Industry 4.0, what is it that we need to actually look at as a future? We started talking about business schools, but I have a significant problem with business schools per se. I have been an academic myself, but I think business schools are doing a lot of disservice to this country than anything else. And why do I say that they do disservice to this country? If you really talk about the business schools itself, what is it that we actually go to business schools for? Barring a few institutions like, say, SPJN, which does a great job, I think most of the business schools are teaching shops, or they could actually be placement agencies. They are glorified placement agencies and nothing else. So quite a lot of you who are standing here or sitting here are trying to think, how can I actually find my next job? How do I actually get placed out of the institutions? And I feel this is one of the most pathetic things that we can even talk about. We should learn rather than looking at jobs. In fact, all the institutions in this country, I feel, should be debarred from even having placement cells in their campuses. And why should we actually have placement campuses? So what is it that you have to do as a youth? You have to go out. If you talk about Industry 4.0, if you want to talk about India of the future has to be a country which is driven by entrepreneurs. This is where I would always come back and say, people who are sitting here should actually become entrepreneurs rather than job seekers. In fact, if you really talk about the industry per se, why does industry give you jobs? Industry actually gives you jobs because they don't want competition. Because if you are very talented, you get paid very well. Because if you actually are, you're going to be paid well according to the kind of competition that you can create, the services that you can give, and so on and so forth. Create your own service paradigms. If you really look at the Indian context itself, what are the kind of stories that we are talking about? If we talk about the history of India, in the last 20 or 30 years, we go gung-ho about the growth story, and we go gung-ho about a certain set of companies. In fact, a lot of you would actually think that TCS or Infosys are the great companies of this country. I'm sorry, I beg to disagree. They're the worst to happen to this country. They are just about what I call as, glorified, manpower shops, nothing else. Their productivity is one of the lowest in the world. In fact, if you talk about a software engineer in a company in India, his productivity is exactly 1/20th of a software engineer outside. So if I talk about an Israeli software engineer versus an Indian software engineer, there is a whole huge productivity difference. Why should we really actually look at this? Why should we actually talk about, there was a very interesting statement that Shashi Tharoor had made one point in time, that it is about cyber coolies, and everybody hated him for saying it, but he was hitting at a point which was very, very critical. And that point was that we should go beyond doing what we are actually doing. We should create products rather than actually just doing something like a back-end chore or just coding for somebody else. In fact, Infosys and Microsoft were created in the same year, 1979, 1980. Microsoft is a billion-dollar enterprise. Infosys is not even close. Companies which are creating products are creating wealth. There was a very interesting news item yesterday that Reliance made something like 10,000 crores of profit in one single quarter. That is 40,000 crores of expected profit. And why does that actually happen? Because they give services of a unique nature. In fact, Ranjan said something very interesting, that the mobile data that is actually getting used in India is amazing. Let me give you a very interesting statistic here. The last 250 million people who have gone onto the internet in this country consume more data than all of United States put together. This is the beauty of consumption in technology that we have actually seen. The question is, how do we actually use this technology is going to be very, very important. But when I'm making these points, there's a very important factor that we need to look at. And that important factor is that we have to redefine capitalism. We have to redefine our belief sets. In fact, let me give you a very interesting statistic. Countries which believe in God, they perform fairly badly at points in time. Countries which are non-believers perform the best in the world from an economic viewpoint. I do not know why does this happen. Is it that we actually look at religion as a reprieve, or is it that we are actually looking at religion as a point of something? So the question here is, if you really talk about the Scandinavian countries, they have the best per capita incomes, no belief at all in God. 97% of them don't believe. 97% of India believes in God, and look at our per capita incomes. So you have to think about it and think very loud. In fact, the next thing that we have to talk about is that if we want to move this country forward, we have to talk about three things: technology, tolerance, and talent. How do I actually use the talent which is available here? We are talking about a demographic dividend, but we are close to a demographic disaster if we do not use our talent right. The second thing is about technology. What do we do with the technology? Can we create our own thing? But last but not the least is about tolerance. I think what we need to talk about is democracy for the future, and a democracy in a world which is very, very, tolerant to ideas, tolerant to situations. We are seeing in the world today that we are not tolerant to ideas and tolerant to alternate ideas. We need to become acceptable to various sets of things, whatever it could be. Why should it be that we are not looking at various ideas and implementing, learning, and so on and so forth? Why is debate dying down? I think in the world of the internet, we are seeing that the debates are dying down because our attention spans are reducing. Last statistic, which is very interesting, people who believe in fake news, people who are over the age of 65 and people who are under the age of 25, they are the people who are actually believing in fake news more than anybody else. So that means there is something startling that is happening in the world that we need to look at. As we move forward, what this tells us is that when we redefine capitalism, we have to bring this aspect of social objectives and economic objectives together. Because if we don't bring these objectives together, we are actually going to be facing a crisis. So Industry 4.0 has to be about bringing social objectives and economic objectives together. Do something wherein you're able to solve the problems, the crisis of the world, than anything else. Indore has shown an example of creating a clean city. There is so much that you can do. But the last call for action, if I ever want to say something before my time's over here, the last call for action from my point of view is that all the youth here, shun your campus jobs. Just seriously throw it out of your dictionary or lexicon. Start creating enterprises, because if you don't do it, we will be regretting and talking about the same set of things in the next 20 years, please. Thank you. Thanks a lot.